Hello you guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rebecca. If you haven't been here before, welcome. So today's video is going to be another in a series of videos. We are going to be talking about Who Killed Tim Kono. So if you are familiar with the Only Murders in the Building Hulu series, I'm sure that's why you clicked on this video. I've been doing theories for a couple of weeks now, and we are officially on to episode 9 in the series. So if you have not watched episode 9 yet, then go check out my other videos. I have episodes 1 through 6, episodes 7 and 8, and now I'm doing 9 before the final reveal. So I will make sure to link my other 2 videos up above if you have not seen them already. I highly suggest watching them first because they're going to talk about a lot of clues throughout the entire series, and this video isn't going to cover all those clues. So like I said, in today's video we are going to be talking about episode 9 of Only Murders in the Building, the Hulu series. This is the second to last episode. Episode 10 will be the finale of the series, and I will definitely do a video wrapping up what I thought of the series, maybe making predictions for season 2, and also covering my reaction to who murdered Tim Kono. So let's talk about episode 9 and the clues we have. So obviously we know that Jan was stabbed. We find her on the floor in her room. Charles is with her calling 911. Then we kind of jump forward a few weeks and Jan is recovering, so we know she hasn't died, which is a pretty big clue. We don't know who has stabbed her or whether she has stabbed herself. We're really not sure. We know that she had that note on her door before she entered her apartment, so maybe someone was threatening her and planning to stab her the whole time. We don't know. The next clue we have is the opening scenes. Now we have Jan kind of covering the opening, and she's talking about a bassoon, and she says that she prefers to think of her bassoon as a beautiful stranger. That way it's special every time she picks the instrument up instead of naming it. And she also says that it takes time to warm the bassoon up and get it comfortable. So I think this is kind of a metaphor for herself. You know, like she takes a little while to warm up and become comfortable in a situation, and she also kind of likes to keep her distance, and she wants to keep things interesting by being a stranger, even to those who know her. So we'll come back to that. Jan also says that it's necessary to see if her and the bassoon work well as one, which is the only way it can work. So we kind of see this idea that there's only one way it can work. They have to work together, otherwise not going to fly in Jan's book. So I kind of thought that this was a nod to Charles, like seeing if she and he will work well together, and if they don't work well together, like what will happen. There's only one way it can work is what she says, and so if Charles isn't going to work with her, then I guess he'll be working against her, is kind of how I read it. So a lot of kind of metaphors in the beginning of the episode. Then I also want to point out, I think I talked about this in my other video, but like we already see Charles pulling away from his friend group, Mabel and Oliver, after Jan gets stabbed. I had this theory in my other video that Oliver was actually the one who wrote the note and left it on her door. So if you want to hear a little bit more about that, then definitely go watch my last video. I also had this theory that Jan stabbed herself, and I feel like this still rings true after this episode, and there are 2 reasons why I think this. One, I think that by stabbing herself, Jan will no longer come in second in Charles's eyes. We saw in I think it's the 8th episode, that Charles chooses the group over Jan. That's another time that she's come in second, I guess, in her own life. She came in second to her sister, which was mentioned in episode 4 or 5. She came in second in her last relationship that she mentions in that same episode when her and Charles are on a date, and now she's come in second with Charles, and she doesn't like that. We already know that this is like a thing for her. So in order to not come in second with Charles, she stabbed herself. She knew that it would draw him in, that he would feel guilt and responsibility because he's the one who was making the podcast. So at the end of the day, if she gets hurt, it's his fault. So he feels this guilt about it. He's kind of doting over her, trying to get her to heal, trying to help her. So if Jan stabbed herself, which I think she did, her plan worked. Like, Charles did pull away from his friends. He's no longer putting her second. He's now putting her first again because he feels so guilty, and he thinks, you know, oh, she was right. You know, Howard stabbed her or someone stabbed her and it's my fault. So that is why Jan stabbed herself. And then also the second reason, to remove any suspicion from her the likelihood of them assuming that she stabbed herself is kind of low. So that's why I think Jan stabbed herself, or at least planned the stabbing. So the first question that we have after Jan is stabbed is, where's the knife? Obviously, we're going to assume that either she stashed it somewhere or someone else stashed it somewhere. And once we find the knife, which I think we will in the next episode, then we will have a little bit more of an idea of what happened with Jan and the stabbing. Some of you after my last video pointed out that there's no trail of blood. There was no way for her to go and stash the knife after she had already stabbed herself. I do agree with you, there is no trail of blood. So does this indicate that maybe someone else was with her and she instructed them to stab her? I think that's also possible. I think it's very suspicious that she was stabbed in the side and not in the back. And I think that being stabbed in the side has a lot less risk than being stabbed in the back. Like, why would someone come up behind you, which she falls forward, and not stab you in the back, you know? Well, maybe they didn't stab her in the back because they didn't want to kill her, because they just wanted to make it look like she was attacked and she was instructing them. So we also meet Saz in this episode, who is a really fun character. They are the stunt double of Charles, and Saz mentions after looking through Tim Kono's garbage bag that they think it is a crime of passion and love. They pull out the 2 glasses, which they smell and then say it smells like bourbon, and the poison was probably put in the alcohol. We know from Tim Kono's toxicology report that he did have alcohol in his system. So is it possible that Tim Kono was drinking with someone and then was poisoned that way via the alcohol? Yeah, I think that's a pretty likely theory, especially because they bring it up in the show. It seems like that's probably how he was poisoned. Saz also pulls out the notes that we found in Tim's trash bag in the 2nd episode and mentions that that is not the kind of note that is a suicide note. It's more of a note of a lonely person. So I think that was an interesting mention and definitely a clue as well. And we see that those notes were written in 2 different types of handwriting, and I have a theory about that, which we'll talk about in a minute. The next clue we have is that Oliver is wearing tie-dye merch at the building meeting, and we see that he's also selling tie-dye merchandise. So this is a huge clue for who was stabbed at the beginning of episode 1 when we see Mabel like sitting over a body. They're wearing a tie-dye sweatshirt. A lot of people automatically assumed that that was Oscar because that was the only tie-dye sweatshirt we had seen, but we now know that Oliver has created merchandise that anyone could be wearing. So is that body Oscar? Is it someone who bought their merch? We don't know yet, but we do know that it's not definitely Oscar. The next clue we have is that Jan says that she has a solo, and then Charles ends up going to her performance to support her and realizes that she has lied about being first chair and that she doesn't actually have a solo, that another person is first chair and has a solo. So we know that she is willing to lie. We know that she is willing to lie to those closest to her, and we see Charles has a nosebleed. I've had a couple of you comment on my videos asking why his nose would bleed like that, and my best guess for why Charles's nose bleeds when he realizes that Jan has lied to him is because he says that he gets anxiety when he is talking to strangers or meets strangers, and in that moment it dawns on him that he actually doesn't know Jan, that she's actually a stranger to him. Because if she's lied about this, what else has she lied about? And this is someone who he thought he knew really well. So when he realizes that she's a stranger to him, he has the nosebleed. And this also kind of goes back to her mention in the beginning of the episode where she's kind of doing her monologue that she and the bassoon are strangers and that she doesn't want to name the bassoon because she likes the excitement of the separation of not really knowing the bassoon. And in this situation, I think it's more talking about her and other people. Like, she likes the excitement of people not really knowing who she is, and she would prefer to not really expose herself fully and become fully vulnerable because she would rather there be some mystery in her relationships, and she's created that same mystery with Charles. The last thing that we are going to talk about as a clue is obviously the bassoon cleaner that we find, that Mabel and Oliver find in Tim Kono's stuff. We know that he's been seeing a woman, according to Miss Doko, who heard screaming in his apartment, that he has been having the company of a woman during multiple different nights, and we are suspicious of who that woman might be, and then we find the bassoon cleaner in with Tim's stuff, and we realize that who is the only bassoonist that we know in the building? Jan. So is it definite that Tim's lover is Jan? No, of course it's not definite, but does that seem to be what they are suggesting? Yes. So let's make the assumption that Tim Kono and Jan have been seeing each other, they've been sleeping together, she sometimes keeps some of her stuff at his place, i.e. the bassoon cleaner, and he also sometimes comes to her apartment, which is why he was on the 6th floor the day that he got on the elevator with Mabel, Charles, and Oliver. There are a few things that I want to cover talking about this. First of all, I have two theories in this situation. One is that Tim Kono was using Jan to get closer to the Demuses. He knew that her apartment was located directly next to Teddy and Theo Demus's. We also know that Mabel could hear Bunny, her neighbor, through the vents in her apartment. So is it possible that Tim Kono, wanting to get closer to the Demuses, used Jan by creating this relationship with her and then being allowed into her apartment through this relationship so that he could actually be closer to the Demuses, be able to hear them and hear Teddy through the vents and what he's talking about, be able to see when the Demuses enter or exit their apartment, maybe even trying to sneak in when he sees them leave, because we know they used to Hardy Boy. I think that's a pretty likely theory. In this situation, I'm still saying that I think Jan did it. I do think that Jan did it. So our who would be Jan, our how would be poisoning Tim via the drinks that they were having together because they were probably dating, or at least, you know, lovers. The why would be because she found out that Tim was using her to get close to the Demuses, and that would basically also be the why now, because once he got the ring that Zoe had on the night that she was murdered, or you know, fell off the building, he probably dropped Jan like a hot potato. He was like, I have what I need, and now I'm going after the Demuses, and I am going to get them arrested. And Jan, realizing that all this time, the relationship that she and Tim Kono had was him using her, was heartbroken. And I think that this is kind of where the notes come in. Like, it's possible that the notes that were written in Tim's garbage bag were actually notes written between Jan and Tim. I think that Jan wrote, I'm tired of feeling lonely. I don't want to be this lonely anymore. And I think that Tim wrote, if there's anyone left to care, there's nothing for me anymore. And I think the reason that he did this was he was trying to get close to Jan, and seeing that she was lonely and that she felt like she didn't have anyone, he sent her this note back to connect with her and get her to allow him into her life. Like, oh, we're both lonely, but why don't we be lonely together? So that is my first guess, and I think that that day when Tim was coming into the apartment from the 6th floor, Jan and him had been drinking together. She had poisoned his alcohol. He went upstairs with the trash bag with the intention of throwing it away, ended up starting to get the symptoms and effects of being poisoned in his apartment. She came over knowing that he would let her in because he knew her. They had this relationship together. And once he let her in, she staged the suicide knowing that he was going to die from the poison that he had ingested, that she had given him. So I think that there's one issue with this theory. And I think the issue is that Jan has now been exposed in the 9th episode. So a lot of people are doubting whether or not she actually had a hand in Tim Kono's murder, because why would they expose who did it so early? And I'm going to tell you why. I believe that Jan didn't work alone. We talked about this a little bit in the last video I made. I accused Dr. Grover Stanley of working with Jan, of selling her the drugs that killed Tim Kono. And I think that after watching the 9th episode, it is extremely likely that it was not a one-person job and that Tim Kono was actually murdered by 2 people. I think that Jan was the leader in this murder and that she planned it, but she knew that she needed help. She knew that she needed the drugs. She knew that she needed someone to hold Tim Kono up, which some of you have mentioned, in order to shoot him in the head and have the blood splatter the way that it did. She knew that she needed help moving the body in order to stage the suicide. And so I believe that the reason they exposed Jan so early is because that the twist in the 10th episode is going to be that someone else in the apartment building helped her plan this murder for whatever reason. So I think that there's going to be a final twist where there is a character that is maybe lesser known to us that is also involved, and that's going to be the surprise at the end. Now, who could this character be? I think that at this point, it could be any of the other characters that have been shown in the series. Some people are suspicious of Will, some people are suspicious of Ursula and her gut milk, people are suspicious of Bunny, and then I am suspicious of Dr. Grover Stanley. So I'm going to explain why I think that it's the good doctor and not the other people who I mentioned. So for Bunny, we literally hear Jan say, maybe the murderer's Bunny. She seems really excited to kick the three of you out and end this whole podcast shenanigan. And I don't think that they would have that be true if Jan explicitly says it in episode 9. So for me, that cuts Bunny out. For Ursula, I can't find a ton of motive for why she would be interested in killing Tim Kono. Also, the only thing I could really think was that maybe she was getting kickback from the deliveries she was making of the black market jewels. But then I questioned if she's getting money from this business that the Demases have by delivering their black market jewels to their buyers, why is she invested in gut milk? You know, she should be making enough money from this black market business that she wouldn't need to invest in gut milk like that. So I think that gut milk is kind of a red herring. A lot of you are really invested in gut milk, and I totally see why, because it's in and mentioned in a lot of the episodes. Some people said that they thought that like gut milk was poisoned and then Tim drank it. I could totally see that being true. But at this point, I don't think there's a ton of evidence that Ursula would have helped with that. With Will, we were told in the first episode that it was someone who was within the building, and as much as it's possible that Lester considered Will a Arconia resident, I don't think that it's that likely that he was there. Yes, he's a vet and he probably has access to that kind of drug, but I couldn't find another motive for why he would help Jan murder Tim Kono. And the last person who I want to talk about is Dr. Grover Stanley, and I think that he is the most likely person to have helped Jan murder Tim Kono. We know that he is a doctor, which means that he has some sort of PhD. In order to be a therapist, you don't need to have a PhD. You can have one, but you don't need one. A lot of you brought up the point that in order to actually prescribe medication, you need to be, I believe it's a psychiatrist, and just because he calls himself a therapist doesn't mean that he's not a psychiatrist. He could be both a psychiatrist and a therapist. And he does have that doctor piece in front of his name. We're not sure that he has the qualifications to be prescribing drugs, so it is possible that it's not him. But it's also possible that I'm completely wrong about everything. So we're just here for the theory. So like I said, Dr. Grover Stanley lives close to Jan on the 6th floor. So he's kind of within the action. I'm going to assume that he has the ability to prescribe drugs like that and say that he does have, you know, his psychiatry degree or whatever you want to call it, and that he prescribed Jan the drugs for whatever reason, whether he prescribed them to her directly because she lied and said she had insomnia, or she suggested that she needed them, or whether he sold them to her because he was low on funds. We don't know, but she did say that she saw a therapist, so it's possible that the therapist that she saw was him, and I think it's very possible that she purchased these heavy sedatives from Dr. Grover Stanley, that she used them to poison Tim Kono, and then she told Dr. Stanley what had happened and blackmailed him into helping her complete the murder. And here's why I think this is likely. I don't see a motive for why Dr. Grover Stanley would hate Tim. The only reason I could think that he would be willingly helping in the murder is if Jan and he had a relationship as well, and she was saying, I just need to get rid of Tim and then I can be with you. But, you know, yes, it's a crime of passion, but I find that less likely than her blackmailing him, saying, I just gave Tim Kono the drugs that you sold me, and I need to stage it as a suicide so that no one knows that he was murdered. But just to let you know, if you don't help me, I will suggest that you murdered him I will let people know that you are illegally selling medication and drugs for money because you're so desperate, and I will implicate you in his murder. So I think that there's definitely the possibility for some sort of blackmail happening there, and that is how Jan convinced Dr. Grover Stanley to help her stage Tim Kono's murder. She entered Tim Kono's apartment. She had Dr. Grover Stanley pull the fire alarm. Tim was already probably feeling the effects of the poison. Dr. Grover Stanley enters his apartment after Jan, holds him up. Jan shoots him with the gun. They lay out his body, and they exit the scene. I think that's a very possible theory. I also think it's very possible that Jan had Dr. Grover Stanley help stab her. Like I talked about earlier in this video, there is no trail of blood or anything to suggest that Jan stabbed herself, walked over, hid the knife, and then laid back down. So is it possible that she had Dr. Grover Stanley again help her to clear her name? Maybe she said to him again via blackmail, if they catch me, they catch you. I will tell everyone what you did. If I go down for this, you go down for this. So you need to help me so that I stay innocent. I'll say I didn't see anything. I'll say that they came up from behind, yada, yada, yada. And so in order to clear both of their names, Jan asks him to stab her. And I also think that it's suspicious that Jan points fingers at almost everybody else other than Dr. Grover Stanley. She mentions Bunny, she mentions Howard, she points the finger away from the Demuses. Sorry if it looks a little different. I had to charge my camera battery because it died, so it's like 30 minutes later. So the second option is that it was a double con, that Jan was working with the Demuses, as I've mentioned before, that Tim was working against the Demuses and was trying to find out more information about them, and so they both were willing to enter this relationship. Neither of them knew the other party was actually using the other person, but they were both kind of on this hunt for information. So Jan, working with the Demuses, was like, okay, let me get close to Tim Kono because I want to know whether he's going to be trying to hurt my business with them. And Tim, knowing that Jan lived next door to the Demuses, was interested in getting close to her so he could get closer to them. I don't think he would have known that they were related or working together or anything like that. I think he just, spatially wise, Jan is living directly next to them, so he figured I could hear them through the vents, I could see when they leave and when they enter their home, I could see how often Theo is at his dad's apartment. Maybe he could even do some Hardy Boy recon and break into the apartment when they weren't there. So I think that could be a theory for why Tim and Jan were lovers, and maybe they were both actually using each other without the other's knowledge. And then the last option that I have, the last theory, is that Jan was actually using Tim and Tim didn't know it. So is it possible that Tim actually really was lonely, that Jan sent him that note to kind of coax him into opening up and being in a relationship with her? She was trying to get close to him because she was working with the Demuses, like I've mentioned. Maybe she's related to them, I've also mentioned that. And in order to find out more information about what Tim knew, she became his lover, entered his space, looked through his stuff, welcomed him into her apartment sometimes, and then poisoned him once she found out that he was close to figuring out the truth about who killed Zoe. The reason that the third theory is maybe more valid than the other two is because we know that Tim Kono had a wedding ring. Why would he buy a wedding ring? Was he planning to propose to Jan? Like, was he really in love with her? This would also give us a little bit of an explanation of why Jan was so interested in protecting the Demuses in episode 8. You know, we heard her say over and over again, I think it's Howard, I think the Demuses don't have anything to do with this, trying to really pull them away and separate them from Tim Kono's murder. And if they are her livelihood, if they're supplying her with jewels, this would make a lot of sense. This also might play out well for if she has someone who she's blackmailing who helped her with Tim Kono's murder, as well as why she immediately became invested in Charles in the same way. Because if Jan and Tim Kono were lovers, it just seems like a huge jump to go from Tim Kono to Charles. And I also think that the reality of the situation is that if Jan was innocent, she would have told the group that she had a relationship with Tim Kono. She would have mentioned it at some point. So it's clear to me that she's guilty in some capacity. So those are the three theories that I have coming into the next episode. One of the last things I want to mention is I've had a couple people bring up the fact that they wouldn't do that to Charles, that Jan couldn't possibly be the murderer because it would break Charles's heart. And I've thought about this a lot. I do think that they would make Jan the murderer, and here's why. Charles was alone for a lot of his life, and he's clearly been in pain over the loss of his relationship with Lucy, and he's had bad relationships in the past where people have left him, like his relationship with Cookie, which he mentions she leaves him for Zaz. So clearly he's been burned in the past. He doesn't have a great track record, and he's alone at the beginning of this series. And then Mabel and Oliver come into his life, and it's the first relationship he's had with people where it's been really genuine, they've been honest with him, and he feels a connection. I just think that his relationship with Mabel and Oliver is so much deeper and so much more important to him that even if Jan does betray him and she is the murderer and she's lied to him and she's used him, at the end of the day, he still has Oliver and Mabel to fall back on, and I think that that's enough to keep him afloat. And so I think that they would do that. They would have Jan be this bad person who does come in and hurts Charles, and I'm sure it'll hurt, but I also think that his relationship with Mabel and Oliver will save him. So thank you for joining me in today's video. If you liked it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell notification, all those YouTube-y things. You know I love to see your comments and your theories and what you think, so definitely drop them in the comments below. I am so excited to see the final episode. I will be making a final video for episode 10 and who the murderer actually is and my reaction, as well as probably a guess as what is going to happen in season 2. Thank you all so much for your support. I really appreciate it, and I will definitely be making more videos when season 2 rolls around, so stick around for that. I will see you all next week with the final video, so I will catch you all then. Bye!